Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of System Link, this time for Wednesday, the 18th of June. I lost my confidence there. It's been a minute.
After last time.
Yeah. I know. It's not great. Mike, welcome. Welcome back to System Link. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Mike Hazelton from the Xbox Guide. Mike, how are we doing, sir?
Yeah, pretty good. Missed a few. Snuck one in for Summer Game Fest. We missed a couple either side, so good to be back.
Absolutely, and obviously we've got a fair bit to talk about there. I think there'll be inevitably some segueable conversation here around stuff around Summer Game Fest and the Xbox Showcase. But we still, despite that, got a bunch of stuff we can talk about this week, some of our clear headlines. We're going to kick off with the recent Donkey Kong Bananza Direct, which Nintendo just dropped. Lots of sort of little nuggets in there. Without expressly saying it, I think they've just confirmed it's the Odyssey team that's working on that game because of the transformation mechanics and the very Cappy-like co-op mode that they've added where you can play as Pauline. She's jumping around on your back and then you can jump off and attack enemies. But I think for all intents and purposes, I think it is very much going to be the Mario Odyssey team that's leading on this game. You can even just see it in the art style. I think it evokes it very much. And they did bring back Pauline in Odyssey as kind of like a little nod to those old Donkey Kong games. So there's a through line here. The Direct, I think, really nice to see them do that sort of 17-minute... it was over 17 minutes, actually, that they went in depth with the game. Nice to get that sort of firm, detailed and extended gameplay footage. I'm hoping we see more of this from the other publishers as well. I hope we see other companies following the sort of Xbox Developer Direct and these dedicated show, like, single game directs from teams. I think they work really well, and they help set expectations for these titles. I think they're really, generally speaking, they're well pitched and a smart play. Chat in both YouTube and Twitch being busy this evening, Mike. We've got a lot going on. I know you've jumped into chat as well. Good evening, Jess and a monster with an RPG jumping in on Twitch. Oreo does stuff. Good to see you, man. Thank you so much for jumping in. Gaming with Passion as well on YouTube. Lovely to see you, buddy. Thank you so much, everyone, for jumping into chat. Please feel free to throw in your thoughts, questions, etc. as and when we go through each of our topics. Mike, where have you landed with Donkey Kong? Is there any interest here? How are you feeling about it?
Yeah, so I watched, I think when it was first announced, they did a Treehouse thing on it. And that was, again, just pure gameplay,
Mm.
which was really nice to see. Like you say, we at Summer Game Fest, it feels like we got very little of that sort of stuff from many, certainly from many Xbox games. And yeah, looks really good. The kind of destruction or terraforming or whatever you want to call it mechanics look really good. I didn't really catch much of the direct, but everything that's come out of it sounds ideal. So yeah, pretty. But it certainly interests me more than Mario Kart, which I'm probably in the minority there. But it just looks like something a bit different. And yeah, would be high up on my list if I get the Switch 2 at some point.
Yeah, nice. So that's really interesting too, because I think in terms of accessibility, the co-op is a nice choice, especially if you're playing with like children or younger players. And then the Dr. Carrot's disciple, evening, good to see you. But also the notion of it being an accessible co-op mode, that you've got someone very much in a supporting role, so you can have them. Nintendo have done that quite a bit with some of their titles, with like certain characters in Mario Wonder that can't be killed or have an infinite jump. Things like Yoshi and Nabbit, which obviously get allowed players, I think, that sort of more accessible entry point to those games, to those traditional sort of 2D experiences. So it's nice to see them doing that.
We have a mixed opinions on the. Obviously, I think the Mario implementation is generally better than some that we've seen in other games, where you're like a completely secondary or perhaps all you can do is fire stuff from the main character's back, or like a secondary fire mode or something. The Mario one is better than that, isn't it? But it's still. Does part of you wish it was full co-op? Can you see yourself playing through Donkey Kong with a friend, or do you think it's only really viable from what you've heard, as a like a parent?
Yeah, I think that's a fair question. I definitely would prefer full co-op. I'd love it if Donkey and Diddy Kong would have been the obvious there, that I think would have been great. Or like indulging the Kong family like you have in Donkey Kong Country Returns, where you can play as Cranky.
Sure, ideally a choice. Like Mario Kart has all these assists that you can turn on, so that basically it will drive itself if you want it to. So it's really approachable for kids. And I think it'd be nice to see. I'm not criticizing it, because it's good to get co-op of any description, but it would be nice if it was a bit more kind of suitable for a variety of scenarios, as opposed to this kind of hand holding.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think it would be nice in there as an option alongside full fat co-op. I think I'd always prefer that. I didn't actually particularly like the implementation in Mario Odyssey with Cappy, because it felt like Cappy was a mechanic that Mario had, and it just felt like the co-op player was almost taking that away. Because Mario, as the single player, you could control it, but then the co-op player could just do it whenever they wanted. And I think it created an unintentional chaos there that didn't really work mechanically with that game. This is a little bit more fleshed out in that you're sort of a full character, as opposed to just being like almost like a power-up in a sense. But it is still very much in that same vein where you're assisting rather than kind of leading it as an equal party in that. So no, I think don't remove it. I think as a concept it's great, but I think it does feel a bit underserved in the full sense of it being co-op. One saving grace, I think, with that, though, the devil's advocate to that, is that they're going to support game share, even on Switch 1. So you could effectively play Switch 2 and Switch 1 together with one copy of the game on Switch 2, which is a really interesting choice, I think, and it could also be a great way, much like how Game Pass and on Xbox and Share Play on PlayStation give that sort of like low stakes, low barrier to entry option for people to try this stuff out. This is a nice way of them doing that ties in with the core feature that, could very easily be a Nintendo thing, where it's a nice bullet point in the press release, but doesn't particularly get supported much going forward. For them to sort of, their first full fat first party game after Mario Kart, to have that, support game share out of the gate is really nice to see, and I'm really glad. I do wish it was fully fledged co-op. I think that was a wasted opportunity there, but I wouldn't want to take this away. I'm glad we have something than nothing, and even if I think it is a little bit limited somewhat. Oreo, we typically... Oh, sorry, just really quickly in chat, Oreo, we typically shoot for about 45 minutes with our podcast.
Presumably, the second character can't deform the environment in the way that Donkey Kong can. I guess maybe it's a limit. Like if you had two characters that can deform the environment, it'd be pretty crazy. But I don't know. And how does the game share work? Is it a copy of the game? Presumably the Switch 1 isn't running the game.
No, it's not. It's hosted on the Switch 2 and essentially sort of streamed either locally or online to it, which is a great concept, and again very much in the same vein as what PlayStation do with SharePlay, where you have sort of a host console and then you play locally with another player, or you can choose to have that second player take over your console. So if you're doing like, you know, we've done it before. I've got some buddies of mine where we've streamed, my friend Johnny streamed the Resident Evil remake, Resident Evil 2, because I wanted to try it out before I got it. And he was able to essentially pass the controller to me and I took it on. He then was able to then revoke access to it. And on PlayStation, they have an hour's limit. So it kind of shuts down after an hour and you just have to restart it to avoid people obviously then abusing it. I don't know of any particular limitations with this at all and how that would work. That might be something we discover sort of after the game comes out or it's clarified near to launch. But
I mean, I feel like the nature of the co-op is enough of a limitation. Like, you're not going to probably want to do that for over and over and over again for hours and hours, just because one player is kind of in that secondary role. Have Nintendo done it before with another game, or is this their first streaming?
They've had cloud
solution
support for games. They've done some stuff where like
not
there's
their
cloud
own
versions,
games,
but not their own stuff. No.
Yeah.
No, so it's interesting.
I mean, that'd be a bit of a concern, but hopefully it will be fine. But I would trust a third-party publisher cloud streaming their games to Switch more than I would necessarily trust Nintendo doing it. But hopefully once they've got this first one out the door, we'll see it more and more.
Yeah, and I think it definitely is the case. We need to see it in the wild, don't we? See it in the real world rather than just conceptually or in a testing environment. So just looking ahead now to some of our headlines. Let's talk about it. Mind's Eye. It has had quite the path to release. I know there was a lot of drama around a couple of key people had resigned from the studio shortly before launch. Our Fast Fusion has Game Share, Gaming with Passion clarified as well, so that's really cool. Now, just Game with Passion, because you often are giving us some live corrections or some live fact checks for us. Does the Game Share for either Mario Kart, Fast Fusion, and or Donkey Kong Bananza work online as well as locally? Because I know that some games support it locally only, some are online and both. Do we know where those games have landed in terms of their Game Share support and what Nintendo have said? You know, is it a local thing, which again might mitigate the issue with streaming because they have wireless play with Mario Kart. You know, you can do that already, and that seems to work pretty well. So just what's the scoop with that? How does that tie in together? So just switching back gears now to Mind's Eye. A couple of high-profile developers had left the studio right before it launched. There was also that controversy around one of the key developers, one of the higher-ups at the studio, actively saying that the game was being paid. People were being paid to review bomb it or to review it poorly, either on Steam or YouTube. And finally, then we have the launch itself, where the game, largely speaking, has been received quite poorly. Some compliments for the storytelling and the sort of the ambition in terms of it being a linear game featuring an open environment. You know, the concept's nice, but from a polish standpoint and a gameplay mechanic standpoint, it's pretty damn ropey. I've seen enough footage of Kind of Funny streaming it. I watched a bit of their stream on it, where you just saw the AI was sort of like first-gen Xbox level up and down, poking themselves out of cover. Really, really, like, it's pretty janky. And that is, I don't think that's an unfair take. I haven't played it myself, so I'm certainly not judging it or reviewing it based on my own time with it. But seeing what I've seen, and obviously the general sentiment around it, I think it's landed pretty poorly.
Yeah, they did the thing where they haven't provided review copies to anyone.
Mm-hmm.
All the outlets have had to buy their own review copies. So there's only like 9 critic reviews on Metacritic, and it's got a 36, which is historically bad.
Yeah.
And there's like hundreds of people working on it, multi-million $100 budget. So it's a bit crazy because when you watch footage of it, it looks like a AA game that's had a really limited budget. It reminds me of, I can't remember the name of that game that launched and then shut within like a day because everyone said it was a scam, and it did launch, but
the day
yeah,
I want to say the day before or the day after. It's one of those. I'm not sure which tense.
Yeah, it feels a bit like a scam in terms of they've scammed investors of a lot of money and not actually spent it on developing the game. But I think also they've had some really big ideas about, I'm not sure if it's quite a metaverse, but like a connected universe all built around this game.
Yes, so there's a huge player creation component in it where you're crafting mission types and sharing them amongst, like, they've got like essentially like a pool of user generated missions and maps that people can then share and download. So the idea was that, you know, they pitched it as constant new missions and
You
content.
build the game,
But you
yeah.
make it for us, right? It's that kind of thing,
Yeah.
you know. But without the sort of wholesome creativity of like a Little Big Planet, it really did feel like we didn't pack this with enough, and we've hit against a budget ceiling. Let's throw in a map editor that we frame as some kind of like community initiative and just shove it out there at launch. The day before, thank you, Game with Passion. There you go, straight clarification. Also mentioned that the Fast Fusion game share works online and worked really well. So,
Yeah.
interesting. So, yeah, and also, I hope I'm not conflating this with another studio, but I feel like there's some GTA pedigree in here. That there's someone either as part of the studio, or they had some of the developers that had worked on GTA titles that would formulated a lot of the basis, probably for the investment that you mentioned there, you know, to try and get that kind of money raised. But also they're in the IOI Partners program. That's the Hitman developer.
That's the yeah. So I think the guy leading the studio, or certainly leading the game, was high up. I think at Rockstar, if not like as pretty high up, and was obviously talking. Similar, I think, similar situation to this, that what we saw at Summer Game Fest was the guy who came on stage and was talking shit about Call of Duty and stuff from Splitgate.
Yeah.
He's been saying, or this kind of team have been saying similar things about GTA, and I mean, you can't talk shit about GTA, really, can you? Because the quality is so. I know, it might not be everyone's cup of tea, but the quality is so high at Rockstar. To then come out and release like a 36 Metacritic game, and that doesn't seem harsh on it from what I've seen, and from gameplay. But yeah, the sad thing is, I think it's IOI's first published game, possibly, and I don't know to what extent they've financed it, because I think Build a Rocket Boy have had massive investment, like sort of independently in the studio. So hopefully it's not too much of a hit for IOI, because I think everyone kind of wants them to do well. But yeah, I'd be hard to see the studio surviving after this sort of release. We've talked in the past, better to iterate and do like a start with a small game and then do a slightly bigger game. They've gone out with like a $500 million AAA game, and it's landed about as badly as it could. So it must be worrying times over there.
Well, very much so. And I think referencing IOI, I believe Hitman, the recent Hitman reboot, was their first self-published title, because they had the full rights to that. And then they're obviously now working on, again, and self-publishing 007 First Light as well. So it was put, I remember when they did their IOI showcase during the recent Summer Game Fest, Mind's Eye was like one of the three pillars of that showcase. It was kind of treated like it was an equal thing. There's a Hitman DLC tie-in as well with Mind's Eye that crosses over. So they really tried to integrate
marketing
it.
Behind it as well. I've seen like YouTube ads, and I think it's been in the cinemas, which is not cheap. And that in itself is strange, that you would not know that it was going to bomb.
Yeah. Oh, by the way,
you'd carry on.
Oreo, thank you so much for tuning in. Just said you had to go there. Thank you so much, buddy. Appreciate you jumping on.
Yeah, that you would just not cut your losses, or I don't know. It might be a case of IOI wanting to kind of show that they're going to be supportive of teams, and but it's hard to imagine. It's I mean, they're going to make an exceptionally big loss on this, aren't they? So yeah, not good.
I don't know what that means moving forward. Do we see a No Man's Sky turnaround where it's patched relentlessly until it becomes the game it was supposed to be? Or does it just get dropped like a lead balloon?
I feel like it's with like another 2 years development or something, you could see, based on the gameplay, you could see how they could have tightened up. But it's really glitchy and bad animation, and it looks like a not graphically, because I think it's Unreal Engine, but it looks kind of in the detail, in the animation and stuff. It looks like a Xbox 360 game, with like fair. Unreal Engine sheen on it. It's weird, and it looks like a AA 360 game.
Which, despite that, Game with Passion clarifying that Leslie Benzies is the producer on GTA's 3 to 5, including GTA Online. He's one of the leads of the studio, and clearly had a huge influence on those massive titles. So, yeah, a really, really disappointing scenario there that clearly didn't pan out for that team. Let's see where kind of obviously that leads. Continuing now, just looking on the Xbox side of things now, we're switching gears a bit. We finally had Final Fantasy 16 make its release on Xbox several years after that game originally dropped on PlayStation and then eventually got ported to PC. And it looks like, from if reports are to be believed, that sales have been pretty soft, been pretty slow since that first dropped. I don't know if people should be massively surprised by this, because for so many years Final Fantasy has not been given parity and support on Xbox, and that community is going to be finding those games elsewhere. They have massive support for the Persona series on Game Pass, which is of a similar ilk, and it's clear that the Xbox fan base has not been fed a lot of these titles, so I don't think there's been a lot of like both discoverability and, yes, anticipation has been there from hardcore players wanting those ports to make their way over. But it's been so long since that game first dropped that I don't know what Square Enix were quite expecting. This just feels like yet another case of their wild projections for a title because of its brand, because of its history and legacy, that somehow it was going to just automatically blow up and do really well. And it seems to be that they've really struggled to connect and find an audience.
Yeah, like it's 2 years. And obviously we've seen stuff going from Xbox to PlayStation after more than 2 years, and it's sold really, or apparently sold really well on PlayStation. But it's a different situation, because I think if you like Final Fantasy enough, you just would already have it on. You would own a PlayStation, because that would have been probably where you found Final Fantasy.
And then
there'd be a very small, and a lot of Xbox owners have PC, so you would have at least got it on PC when it came to PC. So it's not for me, it's not the same as like Forza doing gangbusters on PlayStation or anything, because there just isn't that audience, I don't think, on Xbox. And I think although Death Stranding seems to have done quite well on Xbox when it launched, it did launch at half price. I would be surprised if like a full price Death Stranding would do that well on Xbox, just because, again, if you're into that, if you're into Kojima games, as you probably you would probably be a PlayStation player and would have it already, or you would have at least had it on PC. So it's just not quite the same situation. And so I don't know what Square base their projections on. They're always a little bit out. But it doesn't mean they shouldn't bring Final Fantasy games to Xbox. What it means is they should stop paying extortionate amounts to have Sony should stop paying extortionate amounts to have exclusivity of Final Fantasy versus Xbox, because I think even if it came out at launch, it wouldn't do significant numbers on Xbox, just because the audience is on PlayStation.
There. But also, that audience on PlayStation, we've seen that recently with the Final Fantasy VII Remake, didn't hit its sales target, and it was an exclusive on PlayStation where people would associate it as that brand, and didn't do the numbers. But then again, to that, I think that also does speak to Square Enix's process as a publisher, and sort of never seeming to be satiated with any of the would be for most publishers considered quite reasonable success. They don't seem to ever be satisfied with that. And obviously there's aspects of that I don't fully comprehend, especially in terms of the development budget. We don't know what that looks like. You can imagine, much like what Mind's Eye has now faced, there was probably quite a significant advertising budget alongside those deals, those brand deals, to get that game out there. So not clear at this stage, I think, quite how that's going to look moving forward. But like you say, I hope that doesn't discourage them. If anything, it should make them look at the strategy and go, maybe we should just put this everywhere all at once and just have it out there.
I guess it ultimately depends how much PlayStation have paid, because that may make up for the shortfall in overall sales. Similar to stuff going on into Game Pass. If that deal was generous enough, it may not ultimately matter to them.
Well, to enough people for them to justify continuing and continue doing this. Now here's a really strange one. Next headline. Marathon from Bungie has been delayed indefinitely. According to Herman Holst and Sony's announcement, it's going to still launch before the end of the fiscal year, which would be March 31st, 2026. The response was, I think, that live stream, the response was so tepid. And the way that live stream was pitched, where they had all the developers... I still have a problem with this. I just think it was so self-congratulatory, where they had them all on the stairs leading up and they were all applauding themselves about how great it was. And the wider community response was just especially the announcement of there are only 3 maps and limited modes and the art style and all those things. The gameplay very generic. It's wading into a very competitive space. We've just come off the back of Concord's utter failure. And Bungie just, I think, honestly, it was the only thing they could have done. If they launched that thing in September, I think it would have been dead on arrival. So now they've got a chance to pivot, get more content in there for launch. A delayed game always is going to be better. That's always been my thing, is, you let it cook. I still don't know if we need this game when other games like Arc Raiders, which, by the way, the delay has basically just now cleared the... Now we know Arc Raiders is October, isn't it? Yeah, it's now just cleared the runway for Arc Raiders to come in and absolutely dominate the end of the year in the extraction shooter space. So,
by the way, Arc Raiders, I think, was supposed to be out in 2022 or at least 2023. So that's had a massive delay, and ultimately is a
panned out so well,
stronger game,
because they'd announced the finals, hadn't they? And then they pivoted the focus to the finals to get that out first. And now we're seeing, obviously, the finals is creating that ongoing revenue. It's season 7. It's still got its dedicated fan base. It's, for all intents and purposes, been received well. And now Arc Raiders is going to come in as that 1-2 punch. Premium title, but still budget, in October, which would have been, don't forget, let's make sure we understand as well for everyone that this would have been before the delay, September Marathon, October Arc Raiders. So Marathon would have had the opening salvo there and had at least a month to try and capture some of that audience. But then, given the time frame of the release, it's very likely that people would have started to drop off that, and then Arc Raiders swoops in. The only thing they could have done, the only thing they can do to save this game is to delay it. And they've done that. They should have done it with Concord. They should have rethought it. And they didn't. And they paid the price. And I'm glad.
Yeah, I don't think it's realistic for a studio of the size of Bungie to cancel a game this far along in development, where people are playing it. You've basically had a beta. I don't know if it was a beta or not, but people have played it. So we had the live stream, the sort of gameplay reveal, which went down badly, and then people were playing it and said it wasn't great, which kind of, like you say, they've had real feedback on the gameplay as opposed to just people saying, "Oh, this looks a bit whatever, generic," or. But it's, for me, the amount of work it would need to be different enough. It's very similar to the Concord problem, except Concord looks fun to play. It just looked derivative, whereas I don't think, from what I've seen of Marathon, it doesn't look fun. Still looks derivative. The art style's, a little bit unique, but the rest of it looks very derivative. The content's not there. I mean, we can't just keep talking about Mind's Eye, but it feels like the same thing, that you've got hundreds of people working on this game, and they've got 3 maps and very basic looking art style. I appreciate it's a stylistic choice, but it looks basic.
Yeah, but from a developer with that pedigree, it just doesn't make sense, does it? And Game with Passion explained in chat. Yeah, he said, I think Marathon is doomed. He thinks that it's kind of dead on arrival, and I think that's also a fair point. This is another possible casualty of the Sony now pivoted live service focus, which Jim Ryan had sort of mandated before he resigned. Yet another title that I think is... Well, it's just been indefinitely delayed following Concord's closure, following The Last of Us Online being cancelled, Ben Studios' project being cancelled. There's so much here that is just not coming together. And I think this pivot that we're seeing now from Sony First Party is why it's been so, relatively speaking, so light from them in terms of their consistent output. Or us even knowing what these studios are working on, because they are having to essentially go back to the drawing board. What this looks like for Fair Games now as well, because that's the other project they're still cooking that we've never seen gameplay from ever. Not once. Jade Raymond has resigned from that studio. She started it and has resigned from that team now as well. Former Ubisoft developer. So I think at this stage there are too many unknowns for us to call it, but it's... I'm kind of with Game with Passion. I like Bungie for their history. I love, obviously, their Halo games. I think I like them more than what 343 have done with them in recent years. But arguably a lot of that studio, it's a bit like Rare. It feels a bit like Rare to me. I think Bungie are closer to something like Rare than they are 343. Or Build a Rocket Boy, because I think largely a lot of that management and those teams and those developers have largely left that studio or been... Let's not forget also that Bungie was subject to some significant layoffs by Sony as well. In not too distant past. So it's been a tumultuous time for that studio, and I think the only thing they could have done was delay it. But I don't know how this is going to pan out. personally, I'm not particularly interested, and I don't think it looks good.
Yeah, so for me, I think what they would need to do is forget about even the 3 maps. Focus on 1 map, making it fun, release it as an alpha or something for anyone to play. Try and get some hype around it and build on that. And similar to what we had with how Sea of Thieves was developed, talking about Rare. I think there's what you were saying about them being self-congratulatory and stuff. I think is valid, because it seems like if they'd have done this reveal 2 years ago, a proper reveal, instead of here's some snippets of like what the art style is, people would have given them this feedback 2 years ago, and then they could have spent the next 2 years actually
iterating,
like pivoting it into a better
with
place.
Sony's backing then too, because they would have been bought out at that point, captured all the feedback. Sony willing to fund it. Clearly, they're willing to do that, and they're willing for it to be multi-platform too. They said that their titles will be. Yeah, and it's been
they seem
cooking for a while.
They seem too confident that it was going to be great and be so well received, and it's just how, like Redfall, I guess, the same sort of, maybe it's like too big to fail almost. They just couldn't comprehend how it could possibly be received badly. But this is the thing: if you don't share your game early enough, and we talk about not sharing things too early, but clearly they had gameplay they could have shown 2 years ago. And I think holding it back has been a bad thing. Whereas compared to Arc Raiders, we've known about Arc Raiders for ages, and they've shown really good footage of Arc Raiders a long time ago, and had feedback on it, and also had people playtesting it for ages.
That's it, isn't it? Right there. That's the key bit, is there wasn't a studio-built live stream with a bunch of developers congratulating themselves on how awesome their game was. Embark just went, here's a technical test. Stress test our servers, please go play it. And when you get your hands on it, you realise, well, we were saying at the time, we said it on stream, we've said it on System Link before, that game is ready to come out. I think it's content and polish that they're working on right now, but that mechanically and visually is ready. And that speaks volumes to the iteration that game has had, and the feedback that it's captured, and the way it's steadily built its hype. The Discord's now 100,000 people signed in there, which is just awesome. So exciting.
Yeah, there's studios like Embark and Obsidian, the Call of Duty teams, their output and the efficiency that these teams must work at is just incredible. And then you have teams like Bungie and Rare and 343 to an extent. I mean, there's lots of DICE. They've huge, multiple hundreds of people in the team, and they make one game every 6 years or something that costs £500 million and questionable quality when it comes out. And then you have these other teams that are half the size, half the budget, and they're making like games every 3 years that are really well received. It's just, I'd be looking at those sort of teams if I wanted a studio head. At those sort of teams, not like, oh, this guy works on GTA, so I'm going to have him as my... That's not what happened with Build a Rocket Boy, but not just cherry-picking someone because they worked on a big legacy game. I'd be focusing on efficiencies, how the studios are run, what the culture of the studios, and how they actually go about developing the games.
Exactly. Well, that's how Redfall happened, wasn't it? Oh, they make good sim games. Multiplayer's fun. Let's just make them make multiplayer. Exactly. With a team that's never delivered a multiplayer title in their lives, and then suddenly they're told to reconfigure their whole process. That was the mandate. Game with Passion saying, don't forget GTA 6 is coming. If you release Marathon just before GTA, then it's doomed. If you release it just after, it's doomed. Well, I mean, yeah, the GTA effect is fair, but also I think GTA is GTA. People are going to play that game, and they're always going to then want an alternative if the game is good enough. And
I mean,
Marathon doesn't fit that bill for me.
Do we think there's a chance they could cancel it? Because once you've delayed something indefinitely, if you don't talk about it for long enough, say they don't talk about it again for 6 months, or even, to the end of the fiscal year, then you can just do a press release, say it's been cancelled. It's a bit easier to kind of... The problem with Concord was the game came out and then there was all this stuff about people saying it was so bad, and they said they were like indefinitely pulling it, but didn't say they were cancelling it. But I think people will quickly move on from Marathon, especially Arc Raiders comes out, and then say GTA comes out, and then like a month later they could just. But it'd be such a loss for the financial hit. But if it's only going to sell like 1 million copies, best case scenario, they're still going to lose.
Yeah, and
shitloads of
then
money on it.
because of the nature of the game, it then doesn't have the player base that justifies the ongoing support, so it becomes a cyclical problem, which is where wading into those live service waters is so tricky now, because it's a saturated market, and if you have bad press coming out of the gate, it's just a almost vertical uphill climb for you to try and get through that.
And then what's going to happen to Bungie, because they've got Destiny 2, which we felt was coming to the end of its life. Marathon is the only other thing that... So if Marathon fails, though, they're going to have to develop a new game, which is like 4, 5, 6 years with no major income coming in other than Destiny stuff. It's
a misuse of Bungie's pedigree to have them just be a support studio. You know, it doesn't make sense for them to just become a satellite developer, you know. And what a really troubling scenario that they face themselves in. I think the delay was the only thing they could have done. There is I think a reasonable chance that this thing never sees the light of day now. And like you said, what that means for them in terms of ongoing viability, it really doesn't look good. Let's switch to some positivity. Let's try and savor the jolliness that we're going to be talking about right now. Another strong Game Pass launch lineup for this month. Rematch being the big title. We've both played the other various betas. I played it on PC. I think you played on Xbox. And that's
out tomorrow.
It's coming out. Yeah, dropping tomorrow, and I am so looking forward to that. I think Mike and I will try and sneak in a stream of that at some point. But just loving it. It's just so. It's both pick up and play, and it's also quite intimidating. In terms of, like, you just know what it is. It's very simple. It's very directed, but also there is a learning curve to that game. Especially adapting to the controls takes a minute to get comfy. That's obviously kind of the highlight, I suppose, of the Game Pass updates. We've got several legacy titles, the previous Call of Duty title, and some World of Warcraft, I believe, coming in there as well, being added to Ultimate and PC.
Yeah, Firebreak is out. It's kind of middling reviews so far, which I think was kind of our impression of it when we played. We played it ahead of launch.
I believe that's also day and date on PlayStation Plus as well. They're releasing on both.
Yeah, which I think is important. Because
for the player base.
Yeah, I don't know. It needs a player base.
Speaking of crossplay, by the way, Firebreak crossplay day one, very smart. Rematch didn't manage to get its crossplay ready for launch, so that is not going to be there. They have acknowledged it, and they've said it's coming within the next few weeks. But that will be a post-launch patch that gets added in.
Interesting. Because you kind of assume that's almost built into the technology now to facilitate that as easily as possible. Yeah, I also wanted to just give a shout out. This isn't on Game Pass, but Still Wakes the Deep, which was my game of the year last year. There's DLC for that that's dropped this week. So, as we've said in the past, like, really good use of Game Pass is to release your game on Game Pass and then do like compelling DLC for it. That's not necessarily a cheap add-on, but like almost like an expansion pack. So I'll be hopefully picking that up.
Oh, brilliant! Well, that's exactly the model, right? You got your base game discovered through Game Pass, and then your expansion packs, your DLC, then become the premium add-ons, right? And that's what a great way of doing it.
And then they take the base game off Game Pass, and you're fucked.
Yeah, good luck, pal. But also just for that studio to now be able to afford to invest in their game that was received so well, that the Game Pass deal that they've had and the discoverability and the good reviews has led to them being able to fund that expansion, which then generates additional revenue. It's like the Game Pass dream wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
Now, conversely, I saw a really interesting article with Alex Hutchinson, who's developer behind Revenge of the Savage Planet, frequently outspoken developer. Yeah. He was very much so very scathing of Google Stadia at the time when he was part of that, because his studio was bought out by them. They then spun off and divested once that whole thing shut down. Very critical of Game Pass, saying that it's actually bad that developers for cannibalizing sales, etc.
It's only been out 2 weeks or something. It's crazy.
I think it stood out to me because it was such a contrast to what the majority of indie developers have been saying, which is that it helps people find our game. Sales have gone up on other platforms because of that discoverability. It lowers the barrier of entry to players, so we get guaranteed players day one. It also gives us opportunity to monetize things like additional cosmetics, DLC, and expansion packs. So when you look at that, and that has been pervasive, that feedback has been seen throughout the industry. So this really stood out as a real contrasting viewpoint that, interesting, I always think that's interesting to be able to have that kind of like that back and forth. I just find it very, very unusual. That's not what we have heard generally be the sentiment.
Yeah, it was quite hard to, because the first one was on Game Pass, and like the repackaged one I think was also separately on Game Pass. So weird that having extensive experience of releasing your games on Game Pass, you would then be like, oh, Game Pass is shit.
Right.
It's like, well, you've done it twice before. Obviously, like for a new release, the situation is different. But I also think that game has a problem in that I think it is actually quite different, but from a cursory glance at it, it looks really, really similar to the previous game.
It's third person, but it looks visually very similar.
Like the art, the box art, and all that, and it's kind of. I don't think it's different enough to cut through, and I think where Game Pass really works from like an awareness point of view is when you're an indie game or you're kind of something that wouldn't have got you noticed before. I think your options are like you do, like with Stray, where it was like a PlayStation exclusive originally, and they were featured at the PlayStation Showcase thing. That's like the PlayStation version of Game Pass almost is. Will have you at a showcase, will pay for exclusivity, and will market you really heavily to give you the awareness that you might have got if you'd have dropped in day one on Game Pass. So there's like different ways of doing it, but if that had been exclusive to PlayStation and PlayStation had shown it at a showcase, I still don't think it would have cut through. I just don't think sequels are hard to get that cut through, I think.
And I think Game Pass also generally suits titles like that where they're co-op. I think that it immediately, much like the friend pass we've seen from Haze-like games like A Way Out, It Takes Two, Split Fiction, I think Game Pass lowers that barrier of entry for friends to get involved too, and that you would think then on paper something like that, which is clearly built for its two-player campaign, the box art suggests it too, that it's there ready to go. So they were looking at it, I think, cannibalizing sales on Xbox, but you would surely be anticipating that. That should be expected, especially, but it is also a multi-platform release, so you're not cannibalizing sales elsewhere. You've done your deal, so
yeah, I feel like for me, first person is more accessible as well. So I think the only people who would play that over the previous game, which is presumably still on Game Pass, are people that have completed the first game. So you're not going to outsell the first game with the sequel, and like you say, it's going to cannibalize. You're not going to get any sort of the release date hype on Xbox because it's going straight into Game Pass. So I don't know. I feel like strategically maybe it was just a bit of a weird one to do the day one. The kind of conversely is like Sniper Elite going straight into Game Pass, because that is, exactly what Sniper Elite is going to be. It's but a sequel. The games are almost identical. You just basically new maps for previous Sniper Elite games that they repackage as a new game. And we've never heard anything kind of negative about Game Pass from that.
And they keep doing it. Zombie Army Trilogy, Strange Brigade, both recent Sniper Elites, 4, 5, and Resistance, the new one in January. Rebellion have massively thrown their lot in with that. Atomfall, yeah, of course. I completely forgot about that. That was a 1-2 punch as well. That was January, February for those two games. Yeah. So clearly, and they wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it.
I do think that is better suited to the American and Xbox audience, just the nature of those games.
Sure.
Like if you were looking for a good matchup for the Xbox audience, that would be it, I think.
But then I would look at the pitch of Revenge of the Savage Planet. Slightly quirky, it's co-op, and it's third person. Take away Journey for a minute, the first game. I feel like that does make sense for them to use Game Pass for that. It's been a minute since that game was originally, it's a long gap between the sequels. There's been all that behind-the-scenes drama with them breaking away from Google Stadia in order to divest and make their own studio. So this surely you'd want the easy win. You want a bit to recoup some of your costs, whatever the nature of their deal, whether it's a royalty payment per downloads or one-off fee to help to offset some development costs, whatever their deal, the nature of their deal was. I would be wanting that. If that was the game I was making and I wanted to get out there, that Game Pass would be the way, the facilitator for that. So
The only thing I would say, because I feel like I've been a bit critical of the developers, but Atomfall had a lot of Xbox marketing behind it. It was featured really prominently.
That showcase, I believe, as well. There was a previous showcase.
Yeah, and I think part of that was because it had kind of the Fallout vibe. It was very, very cool setting and stuff that I think they probably realised this will cut through. Like we said, it will cut through at a showcase event even. Whereas Journey, whereas the this game, I don't think at a showcase people would see it as different enough to Journey. But I would perhaps, if I was the developer, be frustrated that Microsoft hadn't put more behind it.
Sure.
Because that's part of what you expect from putting your game on Game Pass.
Yeah,
you'll get some.
And that's
a day one release. You'll get some marketing.
Yeah, and that's historically been a problem. I think is discoverability on Xbox and the consistency of their messaging have been two things that we've seen as issues. Switching gears, looking at now some rumors going around of something Red Dead related happening. What do you think this is, Mike?
Well, people are talking about a next gen, current gen patch for it, which seemed to be the most likely.
Already looks so good.
Yeah, insane. People saying it might be like a film or TV tie-in, which would also be really cool.
Yeah, nice.
I mean, either of them. To be honest, I would probably prefer the tie-in. I just would love to see that, and there's not enough kind of Western stuff.
Can you imagine like a sort of Deadwood, like the show Deadwood? Give me that style, that kind of budget, HBO money, or Amazon Prime. Obviously they've done a great job with Fallout. I'd love like a premium studio to take that on. That would be.
And I think I would actually just want basically a straight retelling of the story from the game, because it was so cinematic. The game itself is so cinematic, or maybe the first game. To start with, because I people are probably less familiar with that now. But I think because I think all the voice actors have been weighing in on the rumor spreading.
That's right.
And I think he's backpedaled on it a little bit. But there is presumably some sort of news. The way he was talking about it was it's like monumental, but
I know. It's gonna be.
I feel like it has to be one of those two. Well, or like a Switch. It can't just be like a Switch 2 thing. Surely it's gotta be something new. Even like you say, the patch is that enough to be that hyped? But I think because people have been so demanding, and probably every time the guy posts on Twitter or whatever, everyone's like, "Where's a fucking current gen patch?" So maybe it's kind of
a PC style sort of update for like PS5 Pro would be really cool. Like if that leveraged PSSR, that you could see that looking really crisp and running really well. Watch the space on that one. We'll see where that lands. We've had some very interesting news this week out of Xbox, just building on our Game Pass discussion around next gen. And we've had some details confirmed that weren't quite as hyperbolic as Sarah Bond's previous. This is the greatest greatest generational leap that we've ever seen. Me doing my Trump hands there just to reiterate the bullshit. But some more concrete things came out of this announcement this week. I think there's some things have now fallen into place. They've reiterated and reaffirmed their commitment to backwards compatibility. Them saying every title, which I assume by every title I mean every title currently supported on backwards compatibility, not
presumably
every game, but because of licensing, I imagine that'd be a nightmare. But your library from Xbox 360, One, and the Series generation will carry forward. That's a lovely commitment from them, and I'm really glad to see them saying that. It's nice to see that they're willing to do it.
I think that should be a given now. Certainly from PlayStation, I would be amazed if like the next PlayStation isn't backwards compatible, because I think as well the technology now is too
so
similar.
Standardized.
They're all just PCs.
Yeah.
It's not like PS3 where it was a bit of a wonky situation compared to PCs.
Yeah.
Nintendo's a bit different. I would never take anything for granted.
You can't.
But
But I think the PS4 generation onwards, when that architecture became much more sort of off the shelf and then
yeah,
customized, it made it so much easier for PS5 to be backwards compatible, and therefore, same again for Xbox Series and previously Xbox One. Reaffirmed that they're now working sort of year partnership with AMD, so they'll be powering all of their future development. It's interesting too because this has kind of come off the back of some reports about the handhelds, the bespoke Xbox handheld being shelved and potentially cancelled. I actually do think it makes sense for them to go with the ROG and go with Asus, who've already got experience in that space. They do have a history of that. Microsoft do have a history of kind of going with other companies and partnering with them to facilitate certain things. I mean, that's how Windows has become so pervasive, as they've partnered with other companies to get that on as many devices as they could. So I actually think this is just speaking more to the idea that we'll see more collaboration, I think, from them through this AMD partnership, through the fact that, you know, we're going to get probably some additional handhelds like the ROG Ally has iterated upon over the last couple of versions. I think we'll see that more going forward.
Yeah. And I don't know how much it makes sense for Microsoft to be in hardware, because obviously they did it with phones and it didn't work. They have the Surface devices, but for me, the only reason the Surface devices work is because they can almost extort businesses to be willing to pay like thousands of pounds for Surface devices because they've got corporate budgets and all that kind of. You get Office 365 with it, and it's all just with service packages and all this stuff. Whereas, like, if you're, I think if you're a high end kind of consumer that isn't interested in a business device, you're just not going near Surface because it's a business tool. So I think it's also if you were Asus making the ROG Ally. What's going to happen to them when Xbox bring out their own one?
Well, exactly.
It's going to be a weird situation.
Why would they sign up? Yeah, why would they sign up to work with their own competitor in the future? It doesn't make sense, does it? So I think if anything, that is an indication. The fact that they're branding it so heavily Xbox, and that they've kind of pivoted that ROG Ally towards Xbox now with that unified user interface with the different storefronts. I do think this is a little peeky window into what they're going to do with next gen as hardware, and they're looking at it now as an option. It really isn't going to be the be all and end all of their strategy, and that's okay.
But I guess the thing is the native console games, which is a lot of people were like, "Oh, it doesn't play native Xbox games." It's like, what did you expect? I can't believe people thought it was the ROG Ally, the Xbox was going to play console games
on a PC device. It's crazy. But then they've got Play Anywhere, so like most of your stuff is just going to be there anyway. So,
and I think that is why there was the big emphasis on Play Anywhere. And
I agree.
As we've kind of hypothesized, we think the next Xbox, as a lot of people do, is basically going to be a PC that plugs into your TV, in which case this whole discussion becomes slightly redundant. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if they are, based on the incredible work they did with backwards compatibility and the licensing, if they're trying to do something with the licensing so that the Play Anywhere kind of goes backwards across
could you imagine
games that you have on.
And then you can like stream them to a handheld, or like that.
Well, you just get the PC. You get the PC
version.
All the Xbox Series games and all the Xbox One games to play on. So there'd be some that fall through the gaps, I'm sure, and some it wouldn't apply to. But if they can come out and say, like 90% of your Xbox console catalog is playable because of Play Anywhere, that we've gone backwards and done this stuff with. The licensing headaches, and bearing in mind they've got this backwards compatibility team, they've got a hell of a lot of people at Microsoft experienced in licensing and all this. That is probably easier than trying to make a handheld that can play Xbox console games.
For sure, so, no, absolutely. I think that's a good thought.
Idea.
I think it's definitely indicative of what their focus is here, and I think this is also a bit of a shit test. They're looking at how they've iterated on that Xbox UI on PC for a while now. The console UI needs to refresh. That needs to next gen. They need to do something new with that and save it for next gen. Don't update it 18 months before your new gen starts and have it sort of cross over weirdly. It's just, no. Feel like there's a step up. Have that new experience waiting for you. But they've been steadily tweaking that PC interface for a while, and obviously the ROG's version of that, unifying the different storefronts, I do think is a clear signal from them that is going to be a priority for them. If I knew that my console with its fixed platform and its ease of access and its great UI I could just sign into Steam and install something on it and run it, awesome. That's what I want. Yeah. More choice, more opportunity to then play with my friends, because then you're able to leverage the the party system and all of those things that have worked on Xbox for so long. It's a very exciting prospect, and I definitely came away much less sort of eye-rolly skeptical at the hyperbole of what we heard previously, but this seemed a little bit more tangible. This partnership seems a little bit more sort of indicative of what we're actually going to see in real terms when the next gen kicks off.
Yeah, and I think they could easily do because the branding is quite overt even on this one, the Xbox branding, but I think they could do a more heavily Xbox branded version to coincide with the console release. That it would still have to have ROG on it, I'm sure, but it would be just, like a special edition that's properly Xbox green and all that stuff. So, like you say, I can't see them competing with it directly. It just doesn't make sense.
I agree, and actually, just to address something again with Passion said there, I'm not sure how they're going to compete with Steam. They don't want to. They want to get in there. They want a piece of the pie. They want to give people access to that. They want to be the ultimate consumer-friendly version that a big mega trillion-dollar corporation could possibly be. That's what they want. They want the ubiquity of their platform being the most open. Don't forget, Microsoft were the ones that spearheaded a lot of the console crossplay that we now see. They were the ones that really tried to push that through, and it was Sony that was the outlier for a lot of that. I don't think they are trying to compete with Steam. I think they're trying to have their cake and eat it too with them. Give people the choice of being there.
Yeah, and it's their OS, so they can show you their offers. They can give slight priority to their stuff. Once you've got kind of in their ecosystem, even if Steam is present on the platform, I think you'll get a lot of casual players, especially people with Game Pass, that will buy stuff through the Xbox store just because it's slightly easier.
It's now easier to access that, whereas Game with Passion makes a fair point. Often you can get cheaper Steam keys and stuff, etc. with that. But those marketplaces being a little bit more in sync with each other and accessible, you'll inevitably gravitate to the one you can access the quickest and it's the most easy to get into. And if it's all just there, sitting there, makes sense.
And play anywhere. So you have to buy it through the Xbox store, and then you get the console to get the play anywhere. So that will be a real differentiator.
And that becomes the value proposition, doesn't it? Like the PC copy. So let's say the Xbox PC copy of a game is actually 10 quid more expensive than the Steam version, because Steam have a discount so you can get the keys elsewhere. But you're getting play anywhere with this one. So you're then able to play that. And achievements, and unified in with your existing friendship group and party system, and then it would be on console as well, should you buy that. So yeah, I can see that definitely being a way for them to balance that equation.
Yeah, I think it's win-win, because consumers, as like a relatively hardcore gamer, you would think it's great, I'll be able to get cheaper games on Steam. But at the same time, if I was looking at it and Steam was £5 cheaper than Xbox, I would still quite strongly think about getting it on Xbox because of the achievements and just it's there within. I know the Steam stuff's going to be in your library and stuff, but just kind of it's just like hassle. It would be a bit of hassle to get on Steam.
It's the play anywhere, it's the cloud streaming, it's the cloud saves. That stuff all being.
If you're paying for Game Pass and you're kind of a legacy Xbox gamer, you'll pay a slight premium to play it on Xbox. You're not going to pay twice the amount or anything, but I think they will think they can overcharge compared to Steam and get away with it with a lot of people.
Well, exactly right. Listen, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in to the latest episode of System Link. You can find us at Burly Bird Media on all of the various platforms: Threads, Facebook, Instagram, as well as YouTube, Spotify, and Podbean. Where this podcast goes up, the audio version will go up every single week. You can also find us on our Discord, which is a jolly lovely place. Please do jump in and check that out. Mike, where can people find you?
You can find me at thexboxguide.com, which is a kind of Xbox news aggregator, or on Blue Sky and Threads at the Xbox Guide, and also on the Burly Bird Discord as well.
Fabulous. Well, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Great to see the chat so lively tonight. Thanks, everyone, for jumping in, and we will see you next time.
See ya.